Hi YouTube, my name's Pam, and this is my 999-day journey. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate you being here. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about planning your garden out. So if you are a new grower or if you are trying to expand what you are currently growing, especially if you're looking at producing a significant amount of your family's food, or if you are thinking about growing enough excess that you can take it to market and sell it or barter with it, this is going to be a good video for you. Before we start talking about planning, I want to talk about, for you new gardeners, what you should have already considered before you start thinking about what you're going to grow right now, or what you're going to grow this growing season. So if you're just getting started, you need to answer 3 questions. What, where, and when. So those are the 3 big categories of questions that you need to have worked out before you start planning. For what are you going to grow? That's going to depend on what you like to eat, what grows where you live, and what will fit in the space where you plan to grow. So, you know, if you live in a small apartment with just a windowsill, you might not be able to grow a banana tree, for example. So, you know, that's not going to fit in your space, unfortunately. Also, you know, even if you have a large yard or a large property to grow on, if you live in Canada, you may not be able to grow tropical fruit. So you'll need to think about that. And then the last thing is, if you're allergic to bananas, you're probably not going to want to grow bananas, right? You're going to want to grow the things that you know your family will use, that make sense for you, and or things that you know will, if you're looking to create an income with gardening, what will sell well in your area. So, you know, sometimes you can get into specialty crops and that sort of thing. But you've answered the what question. What are you going to grow? The next question you need to ask yourself is where are you growing? You need to take into consideration your growing zone. You need to know if the things that you would like to grow will actually grow well in your climate. And you can find your growing zone very easily with a simple Google search. Just plug in, if you're in the United States, plug in your zip code or your city and state, and it will come back with that answer. And then most of the things that, you know, most of the seeds that you can buy commercially or whatever will indicate what zones the plant will grow best in. So if you are in a colder area where, you know, say you're in growing zone 4, then you may not be able to grow a citrus fruit that will only really produce well in zone 7 or higher, right? So figure that out, and then think about, in your space, where will you physically be putting down your plants to grow? If you live in a small apartment with just a windowsill, if you have a balcony or a patio or a large yard, or maybe you have access to a community garden area that you can, you know, get a plot in. Think about where that is, and then also think about what resources you will be able to supply to that space. So if you're going on your windowsill, you know, you can have a watering can right there, and hopefully it's getting sun. If you are, you know, if you're growing in a community garden, does that community garden have ready access to water? The next thing to consider is when are you going to grow? So once you find out what your growing zone is, you can figure out how long your growing season is. How long do you have to actually, you know, get plants from start to finish so that they're ready to harvest. If you only have a 90-day growing season, you might not want to plant something that requires 120 days of full sun, right? Because then your plants won't reach maturity. The other when question to ask yourself before you get started gardening is, when are you going to have time to work with your garden? So this one was a really hard question for me when I first got started, because, you know, I'm a single mom. My children, you know, were very active, and there were things that I needed to attend. I worked 2 jobs. I just didn't have a whole lot of time for gardening. And the first couple times I tried to plant things, I planted them and then they died, or they from neglect. Mostly they died from neglect. It's kind of sad. So it wasn't until I really made a commitment to putting in the effort and the time required that I was able to be successful with growing things. And there are plants that require more and less maintenance, right? So just keep that in mind when you are looking at the kinds of things that you want to grow. If it's something that requires a whole lot of maintenance and effort, but you are a very busy person and don't have time or energy to provide that maintenance, then you may want to think about choosing other varieties of things to grow that require less time. All right, so when you have answered that set of what, where, and when questions, and are ready to get into planning what you're going to grow this year, you'll have a whole new set of what, where, and when things to consider. When thinking about what to grow this year, the first step is look back. Ask yourself, what did you eat? What grew well last year if you had a garden before? Did you have enough of it? Did you have too much of it, right? The next thing is, what do you have on hand? Do you have seeds already? Are any of them, getting to be a couple years old, so maybe they may not germinate as well, or you need to, you want to go ahead and use them up before you start having germination issues. If you grew last year, do you still have 20 jars of green beans sitting on your shelf? If so, you may not need to grow as many green beans, right? The next thing to think about is, what do you want and need to grow? Last year, I only grew tomatoes and peppers and beans, and I did that from transplants because I was in the middle of a move. So this year, I want to expand what I'm growing, as well as increase the volume of the things that I grow. So last year only had I think 4 tomato plants maybe, and this year I'm going to have 10 tomato plants because I had barely enough this year to eat fresh throughout the summer, and so I want to increase what I'm eating fresh, and then I want to also be able to put some back. So I'm going to effectively double the amount of tomatoes that I'm growing. All right, so once you know what you want to grow this season, check your inventory. Do you have those seeds? Do you need more? Go ahead and get those seeds ordered as soon as possible. I know a lot of seed companies are running out of supplies. You can also find seeds if you don't want to use the internet. You can go locally and check out the Dollar Tree. If they still have any left, they have great seeds that grow very well that I've used in the past for cheap, like 4 packs for $1, right? Check out that, or your local big box store. There's lots of places where you can get seeds. So once you know what you're going to grow, the next thing to think about is where. So think about, for the volume of plants that you want to have and the variety of plants that you want to have, what sort of growing space will you need? For each type of plant, you've got to consider the space that they will take up, the nutrients that they need in the soil, how much sun do they need, how deep does the soil need to be. Think of those things. Also, the growth cycle. How long does it take for each plant to be ready to harvest? What size will the mature plant reach? The time to harvest and the size of the mature plant will come into play with, especially if you have a smaller growing space, with how you place those things, right? Because you don't want your tall plants to shade out your shorter plants from the sun. So these are things to keep in mind, right? And then also, when you have figured out what each plant needs in terms of soil and water and light requirements, you can then figure out what plants would be good to place together. So companion planting. There are certain plants that play very well together, and then there are certain plants that don't play well together. So I encourage you to research that for each variety that you are growing in your garden. And then the other thing for considering the growth cycle, how quickly does each plant come to maturity? That's important because you will also want to consider if you're going to grow multiple cycles of those. So I will go back to the example of radishes because I love radishes, and they grow so quickly. You know, I will not put my radishes out on the ground in the garden. I won't take up space for that. I will use a container for radishes because they require, you know, not super deep soil. I think you only need like 6 inches of soil for radishes. And they grow so quickly that I can just, you know, plop seeds down in my container on my balcony, and, you know, very quickly just change those out as they come to maturity. I can just plop more seeds in and I'm going to be done. I don't have to haul all the way out to the garden and deal with them out there for something that I'm going to be harvesting every 3 weeks, right? So those are the kinds of things you'll need to consider when you're thinking about where to plant each thing. The next step for me in figuring out where to plant is to draw it out. So once I have an idea of what I'm growing and the space and light and water requirements for each thing, then I think about, okay, in my space, in all of the gardening space I have available to me, what makes the most sense for each plant? As I mentioned with the radishes, for me it makes the most sense to put them in a container on my balcony. Okay, so I'm going to draw out my container and I'm going to grid off, okay, I know that I can put in this container 20 radishes at a time, but I need 60 radishes over the course of the summer, so that means I'm going to have to grow 3 containers full. Beyond that, you know, for each raised bed I have, I know that my tomatoes and my bell peppers will grow nicely next to each other because they have similar water and sun requirements. I can put those in the same raised bed, and so forth. So you can do this on just a piece of notebook paper. You can do it on the back of an envelope, whatever makes sense for you based on your growing space. In the past, I have done everything from the back of an envelope to just a piece of notebook paper to graph paper by hand, and you know, or in an Excel spreadsheet, you can make a grid. I have found that physically drawing out where I want to plant everything helps me by showing me if I have planned appropriately. Do I have enough space to grow all of the things, physically grow all of the things that I would like to grow this year? If you find that you don't have enough space, or you don't have the correct number of containers or whatever, can you get it? Do you have more physical space that you can add containers to, or that, you know, can you build another raised bed, or how can you, you know, best work with what you have available to you? If you underplanned, so if you know, have more space available than what you had already planned to use, then you know that you can, you know, add another tomato plant or another, you know, whatever. And then if you find that you have planned to grow more than what you can accommodate space-wise, you can prioritize what will bring you the most value. And so when I say the most value, I mean if your family eats a ton of tomatoes, and so you were planning to grow a ton of tomatoes, but you were also planning to experiment and grow, you know, a new variety of squash, for example, that, you know, just for fun or giggles, then maybe you want to prioritize, if you don't have enough space for everything, you want to prioritize your tomato plants over the squash, right? And so drawing it out, having that sort of visual is very helpful for making sure that you have a place for everything and everything can go in its place. It will also make it super easy when it's actually time to get the plants in the ground, because you will know exactly where everything's going. There won't be quite so much guesswork. So the last and probably most important question to consider when you are planning your garden for this year is when to start your seeds inside, if you're going to do that, when to put transplants in the ground, and when you will need to harvest each variety of thing that you're planting. The first thing to plan for is your frost dates. You need to know your average last frost date in the spring and your average first frost date in the fall, which will give you your total growing season and will allow you to make plans for getting plants in the ground. Knowing your last frost date in the spring, you can work backward from that if you plan to start seeds indoors, and give yourself enough lead time to get some good healthy plants ready to go in the ground as soon as the danger of frost is past. Of course, some varieties are fine going, getting a light frost, and some are not. That will depend on, what you're growing as well. But you will have already looked at that information when you were determining what to grow, right? So you might also, when you're thinking about your frost dates, look at a resource that is local to your area that will adjust for the current forecast for your area. I personally use the Old Farmer's Almanac as a resource for me. Their website has a great page where you can plug in your US or Canada postal code, and it will tell you for a large variety of fruits and vegetables what specific dates this year, based on your location's average last frost date. It will tell you the specific dates for each vegetable when you should start your seeds indoors, or when you should transplant or put transplants in the ground outside. It will also tell you the harvest dates as well. So this is a fantastic resource. I will put a link to that in the description below. Then, once you figure out those dates for each thing that you want to plant, and for me this is super, super important, put those dates on a calendar. Get it in writing, get it in front of you so that there is very little guesswork, so that you know in advance, oh, on February 15th, I need to start my tomato seeds so that they're ready to go in the ground in March. Think of the whole life cycle of the plant, from what date am I going to start the seeds, what day will I transplant my seedlings, when will I harvest, if it is something that has a very short growth cycle, am I going to do succession planting, and then once I harvest, how long can I store the vegetable? When do I have to do canning and that sort of thing? So the entire life cycle of each and every plant. So once you've got all your dates mapped out, you've answered your what, where, and when questions for planning, the next step is really just to get it done. You're going to want to get your supplies together. Whether that means you are, if you're new, if you're just starting out, if you're going to order or buy or build, you can also find them. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. You can do this on a budget. You can use things that you have around the house. You can do this largely for free. Just keep your eyes open, save everything that might be useful, and watch for sales. You can shop at the end of the season, in the late summer. You'll find great deals on things that you can get for the next year. Lots and lots of options. And if you need help finding things, let me know in the comments. I can help maybe point you in some different directions. So that's the first thing. After you have completed your plan, you want to start getting it done. After you have your supplies, you will want to prepare your growing space. So if you're going to be growing in containers, and here I'm talking about your actual growing space, not your seed starts. Sterilize the containers that you're going to be using. Work your soil. Make sure that your garden beds where you're going to be planting have any soil amendments that you need to make, that they're weeded and to the point where they're ready to go. So this was how I go about planning my garden each year. I hope that this video contains some information that you find useful and helpful. If you have any questions that I didn't answer, or need some additional information, feel free to drop a comment below and I will be happy to respond. And if you liked this video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell icon if you're not already a subscriber, and so that you will get notifications when I make new videos. And feel free to share this as well if you know someone else who might benefit from hearing this information. Thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you being here, and I will talk with you tomorrow. Bye-bye.